So yes, welcome to the second uh, installment of a three-part series for some study of trauma-informed ways to look at the Satipatthana, and we're really appreciative at the Dharma Collective that Amma Thanasanti is here presenting this series again with us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be back here. It feels like really important time to be talking about these things. So I'm grateful for your interest in your presence. Yeah. I'd like to invite us to shift gears into a meditation. So if you can move away from devices, turn devices off or silence them. And what I'd like to invite you to do is just to take a moment and notice where your body is. Notice what your body feels like and the shape that it's occupying. And before you close your eyes, I'd like you to just look around the space. And this time I'd like you to notice all the things in your room that are vertical. The door jambs, the picture frames, the edges of the furniture, the edges of the curtain, the edges of the wall. And just go around and count vertical lines that you see. And as you are counting vertical lines, notice what happens when you bring your attention and orient outwardly. What happens? And now look around your room and notice the things that are green. And so sometimes it's helpful before we close our eyes and focus inward that we orient outward. And let our attention settle on things that are soothing or calming or neutral we can wrap our mind around. And now I'd like to invite you to put your hand on your heart and another on your belly. And with your seating posture, I want you to rock back and forth so that as you rock forward, you can feel your hand, your chest coming and filling up your hand. And as you rock back, you can feel your hand pressing your chest backwards. And so now, rather than locate the movement from your hand and your chest, I want you to shift your attention down your spine so that the movement is originating from your hips. And so you can notice a rocking forward on your sitting bones and a rocking back on your sitting bones. And that your chest is following the movement of your hips and that rotation of your hips tilting forward and back. And now as you continue with the rocking, allow it to become smaller, but just see if it's possible for that rocking to continue even as a micro movement, a tiny little movement back and forth. And this rocking, this tiny little rocking, is something that you're welcome to keep with the whole meditation practice. It's soothing, it's settling, it's supportive. So there's one more practice that I'd like to invite. If you would like to join me humming, just humming. So now, as it feels easeful, either to leave your hand on your chest and your belly, or to let them fall to a place that's comforting. And now, after these different practices of orienting outwards, rocking, and humming, gently allow your attention to feel the breath. The breath as it comes in and the breath as it goes out. So there's no need to control the breath. There's no need to have any special kind of breath to make it be any particular way. You just want to open up and receive the breath as it is, as it comes in and fills you, as the breath releases and leaves you. So there's the body experience of breathing, the physical contact of the air and the different tissues, the movement involved with breathing, and the impact of breathing. And there's another quality that we can focus on in addition to the physical body experience of breath. We can tune into the feeling tones of breath. Tone of pleasant, of unpleasant, and of neutral. And so as you're breathing, just notice what feels pleasant. It might be the little bit of nourishment or uplift. It might be the coolness of the air. It might be the feeling of expansion. It might be something completely different. Just stay with the pleasant quality of the sensations with the in-breath and the out-breath. Focus on the pleasant quality. And so you can focus on the pleasant quality and let the pleasantness fill you. And it might be the pleasantness of a little bit of relaxation with each out breath, or a little bit of release or settling. So there's the pleasant tone, and there's also unpleasant tones. And so if you notice unpleasant tones as you're breathing, notice where you feel them and the texture of them. And it's important when you notice unpleasant tones to move your focus back and forth between unpleasant and pleasant. So we don't want to lock down, grab hold, and wrestle something that's unpleasant to the ground. It's like we want to take a duster and sweep across it, reconnect with something pleasant, and sweep across the unpleasant again. So there's gentle contact, but not any lingering with the unpleasant. Just gently touching it, reconnecting with what's pleasant, and then moving back to the unpleasant. And now the invitation is to shift to the third tone of neutral. It might be the feeling of the cloth against your skin, or the wetness in your eyes or in your mouth. Might be the sense of temperature or the smell as you're breathing in. And as you are with neutral, sometimes we can notice that it's not easy to stay with it. Our mind tends to get distracted, or we get bored or restless. We want something that's more stimulating. So we don't need to have a judgment about our reaction, but sometimes it's helpful just to open up and notice it. It's not easy to be with neutral. Take some practice. So when we come back to the pleasant sensation, it is true we can use the pleasantness to fill our awareness. But we can also reflect on the pleasantness and notice how there can be a tendency to want there to be more and more of it. So we don't need to have an opinion about that. We can just wake up to that if that is what is happening for us. With pleasant sensation, the desire for more pleasantness. And if we can allow our attention to shift to something that's unpleasant for a moment, just notice if there's resistance or tension or not wanting it to be there. Apprehension. So in these three feeling tones of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, we can see them. We can see our reaction to them. We can begin to allow our attention to notice them in all the things that we're experiencing, our sensations and our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell. Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Now coming back to the breath and allowing the breath to fill you, fresh air, allowing the out-breath to support you, letting go of stale and stagnant air. Bringing the breath to enliven and invigorate and bring a little bit more energy. Allowing the out-breath to help you relax and release and let go of the day and the conversations of the day, the memories of the day. Just settling in, being here present with your own body and heart and mind, attentive and relaxed, open. And as you are here in these last minutes of the meditation, just notice what it feels like to have your attention in a relaxed, inward way, feeling and sensing your body, these feeling tones of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And see if it feels right to you to make a commitment to keep at least like 60% of your attention rooted inwardly. So even while I'm talking, you're listening to what your experience is receiving it, what the body impact is, what the feeling impact is, what thoughts and perceptions you have. And so in this way, even though it appears as if only one person is speaking, it's a complete dialogue that you're having with yourself about the impact that you hear from what I share. And with this, I invite you to slowly open your eyes, look above the screen, look around the room. Notice what you notice. And now the invitation is to look at the screen, and if you have your pictures off, if you would be willing to turn them on so that we can see you, we can see each other, and just get a sense of who's in this space together. Going to be spending this next time together, and just notice what you notice looking at each other here in this space together. Thank you. So this is our second class in our trauma-informed Satipatthana series. Satipatthana means the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And I just want to recap briefly of what we covered in the first class, mindfulness of body. Starting with a summary of the various different kinds of trauma, mentioning developmental, situational, systemic, epigenetic, vicarious, compound. And so in these different ways, it shows how widespread the trauma can be. And then I mentioned we are in a time with socially engineered trauma. It's its own category. And so what was extensive before is even more extensive now. So the first instruction is to go to the forest, a root of a tree, an empty hut, sit down to establish mindfulness and focus on what's happening in the body. And this presumes a certain level of internal safety. And so when we have trauma that is undigested, it's not something that we can assume. So before we begin with the Satipatthana instructions, what's really important is to establish enough safety in yourself. Pay attention to the safety around you. And as we did in the beginning of this meditation practice, do some things that were orienting outwardly, helping us to settle and to calm, humming, rocking. All of these things are helpful practices to bridge when we're not feeling safe in ourselves, so that we can then be able to settle and then be able to make use of these meditation instructions. So the first foundation of mindfulness has many different meditation instructions that includes a whole series of instructions about the breath, working with the four postures, bringing mindfulness to all of our daily life activities, understanding the elements, learning about the parts of our body and having a relationship with it that's neither infatuated nor what's the word? The opposite of infatuated, disgusted, just even-minded, equanimous. And then there's a whole series of contemplations on death, so that we have more and more like a reality check, that when we have one of these, that's what's going to end up. And that when we take the death contemplation to its conclusion, we can see that there isn't even an image of a self that you can construct in the final stages when you're just looking at dust. There's nothing that resembles a person. And all of this is so that we can have more of a clear relationship with life and be less frightened and less intimidated by these big forces that come through us and at us and trying to manipulate or control, intimidate. When we're clear and when we're rooted and when we're settled and centered, we have much more capacity to know what we need to do and to move in that direction. So the first foundation, the body, is the ground, and we can use it when the other foundations are too much. So if we're working with the second foundation, the feeling tones, and something happens and we start feeling overwhelmed, we can shift gears and come back to the body. So we can use the body, we can use these series of meditation practices like medicine as ways to give us strength, as antidotes when we're feeling restless or unsettled, or to help us come back when we're feeling like what we're dealing with is more than we can manage. So we need to be also careful, because when we are feeling activated, when we're feeling triggered, then paying attention inwardly to the body also can be triggering. So there needs to be the discernment about when focusing on the body is supportive and when we need to orient outwards before we have the capacity to focus on the body. And part of what the trauma-informed tools are about is helping us to develop more language and frames of reference and understanding to help us identify when working with the body is skillful and when we need to do things like orient outward, hum, or focus in another way. Have cats, cuddle cats, go watch children playing in a playground, hang out in a bookstore with the children's section of the books and read, whatever it is that we need to do to come back into a space where we're able to manage. So this first part of this talk is going to be speaking about the second foundation of mindfulness, which I introduced in the meditation. Vedana in the Pali, it means feeling. But unlike the English word feeling, it doesn't mean emotion. It refers to the feeling tones related to pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And these feeling tones are present in everything that we experience: our body sensations, our thoughts, our moods, what we hear, what we see, what we smell. And so these feeling tones is something that we all have. And it's important to recognize them because they are an access to being able to understand latent hindrances. When we experience something as pleasant, it's often the case that what follows that is the desire to have more of it. When we experience something as unpleasant, we can often, not always, we can often experience resistance or aversion or apprehension or desire to get rid of it. And when things are neutral, we can space out, get distracted, get bored. And so that whole process of delusion is a whole category of like, how is it that we can see the things that we're not seeing? And so the part of this meditation practice is to begin to give us the way to see the steps of the Yeti, even if we can't see the Yeti directly. So in the early stages of contemplation of feeling, one simply observes the distinct qualities as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then after some time, it shifts from the qualities to the process. And as we start paying attention to the process, we start seeing an endless flux of feelings coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. And as we see this repeatedly, we begin to have a really deep sense for how transitory things are. And as we see how transitory everything is, then it begins to give us some leverage so that we're not as likely to be caught by the desire, the aversion, or the delusion. So the insight into impermanence is a way that we can start moving against some of the hindrances that we have. But one of the reasons why the second foundation is so helpful, particularly in the world that we're living in now, which is so complicated, is that we're constantly bombarded with input. And like a coffee percolator, where you've got the coffee coming in the filter and then going through the funnel and then coming into the pot. The world that we are experiencing is wide, it's vast. There's all kinds of things and sensations and sights and sounds in all kinds of mixture. But when we look at it from the perspective of Vedana, there's just three things. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? And is it neutral? And when we take something that's incredibly complicated and we are able to distill it into something that is simple, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, then that helps us process and manage some of the overwhelm that we can be experiencing with the complexity of what it is that we're dealing with. But it also doesn't stay simple, because when we deal with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, those things are not fixed. So Dipa Ma was a meditation master that I met in India and I loved deeply. You know, her stories and what she did and her life was really moving to me. And she was one of the reasons why I decided to become a nun, because her life and the way her mind opened to meditation was remarkable. Her teacher's name was Munindraji, and Munindraji loved Bengali sweets. Bengali sweets are like almost kind of like pure sugar, you know? And so he had this like constantly craving Bengali sweets. So he decided very deliberately that he was going to take a pound of Bengali sweets and mindfully eat them until he got to the end of the pound. Well, after eating a pound of Bengali sweets, whenever he thought of Bengali sweets, it no longer had a positive association, it had a negative association. And, you know, we can imagine the same. Like, imagine your favorite food. Just imagine what your favorite food is. And now imagine eating that same thing every single day for a month or 2 months or 6 months? And in your imagination, is it still your favorite food? So our exposure to something, the way that we love something or don't love something is contextual. And when we change the context, it can change the Vedana. And so when we shift our expectations about what is going to come and our fears and reactions to the associations, all of this determines if a particular experience will be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so it's really helpful to recognize that in the context of a trauma-informed meditation, we need to understand that when we have undigested trauma, it's likely that we're going to have heightened sensitivity to certain sensations, experiences, or associations. And so when we understand that a trauma response is a combination of something that's physical and emotional, and also results in behavior changes and impacts how we cope with stress, how we perceive safety and engage with the world around us. And so what this means is that we need to expand Vedana and the understanding of how to practice with it to include recognizing when we are inside and outside of our window of tolerance. And this is particularly true when we're dealing with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. So the window of tolerance, when we are inside of our window of tolerance, we can have experience which is mild or medium or intense. But the window of tolerance refers to the range of experience in which we can effectively cope. So when we're within our window of tolerance, we can think, we can manage our pain levels, we can deal with our emotions, and we can respond in a way which is balanced and adaptive. We can engage with what is going on without feeling overwhelmed or shutting down. However, when we're outside of our window of tolerance, we might be experiencing anxiety, panic, anger, restlessness, disassociation, and all of these experiences make it difficult to deal with the pain or the stress that we're experiencing. And so this can lead to either feeling overwhelmed and really agitated, or feeling numb and disconnected. And so what I'd like to do next is to describe some of the symptoms of being outside of one's window of tolerance and talk about a few things that can help. So sometimes when we're out of our window of tolerance, it can be the experience of being overwhelmed, and that's referred to as hyperarousal. And this can include rapid heartbeat, shallow, rapid breathing, feeling on the edge, constantly feeling alert or feeling jumpy or easily startled, having such difficulty relaxing that not only is it hard to relax your muscles, but you can feel like just a kind of a basic tension, that you can be extra alert to threats in the environment or extra sensitive to noise or to lights or to crowds. Does that sound familiar? So it can also show up as emotional dysregulation, where moods and emotions are hugely impacted. And so this can be feeling anxious or panicky, or having episodes of fear, or sweating or trembling or shortness of breath. And it can also include worry and having a difficult time focusing and concentrating. So ordinarily our mind has a hard time focusing, and it tends to move from one to the other. But this is more than just an ordinary mind that is not able to stay still. So hyperarousal is one side, and then the other side is hypoarousal, where you can feel numb, or your emotions are muted, or you feel disconnected from reality. Or you might not be able to feel your body. You might not be able to know what you're feeling. How is that? Is that familiar? Yeah. So one of the things that we need to learn is the signals of when we're out of our window of tolerance, and then develop a toolkit of what we can do to help us get back in. So one of the things that's been a big support for me is nature. I go and be around trees, or sit on big rocks, or go to water, or when it's warm enough, I take my socks off and I walk on grass. And I alternate between grass and concrete or wood chips or gravel, so that the change of sensation on my skin helps pull me back into my body. Pets are awesome. Just the contact with them and their love and talking to them and cuddling them. I happen to love dancing, and dancing for me is a really super regulator. Friends, or humming, chanting, moving physical body, moving the energy, moving the breath. And so each of us needs to develop a toolkit. And one of the things that's really important to remember is the first thing that goes offline when we're out of our window of tolerance is to remember all of our tools that help us get back in it. And so it's like what we need is like a body memory. Like you might not be able to think, but your body might be able to like say, okay, trees, just get me to the trees. So it's not like it's not like a thinking process. It's more like a familiar response. And so what we did in the beginning of orienting outwards and looking at vertical lines and looking at green things, and then putting our hand on our heart and breathing and rocking and humming, all of these things can be part of your toolkit if you find them helpful. So we will be talking more about the First Noble Truth in the next class, the second part of the next class. And the First Noble Truth is really the description of suffering, and the suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path that leads to the end of suffering. And so one of the things that's really important to understand is that while it's undeniably true that there is suffering, we need to be discerning about different kinds of suffering. So the choices we have about suffering when we're inside of our window of tolerance is very different than when we are outside of our window of tolerance. And so when we are outside of our window of tolerance, the number one first task of highest priority is to get back in our window of tolerance, because we cannot effectively make use of any of the meditation practices until we have done that. So part of what we need to do is to learn to recognize the symptoms of what it feels like in our own experience as we start getting towards the edge of being at the window of tolerance, and then what it's like when we're outside of it. And part of it is that we need to develop a set of tools that we can help to bring us back in. And then we need to figure out, how do we remember when the first thing that goes offline is our ability to remember? So the sutta talks about working with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And it's just going in and saying, recognizing I see a pleasant feeling, recognizing I see an unpleasant feeling, and recognizing I see a neutral feeling. It isn't about judging it. It isn't about changing it, just about recognizing that that is there. And then the refrain talks about contemplating feelings as feelings internally or as externally. So you can't contemplate another person's feelings, but you can see the impact of another person's experience. And that's what it's meant by contemplating internally or externally. So the second foundation of mindfulness is all about working with these feeling tones. The third foundation of mindfulness is about mind objects. These are the things that we think. These are the things that we have emotions about. And in these times of socially engineered trauma, we can have big feelings because the whole point is to get us out of our window of tolerance, jack up our nervous system so that we're not thinking clearly and so that we're not able to respond clearly and effectively. It was explicitly stated that overwhelm was part of the idea. So we need to be careful, very careful, what we pay attention to. Because with this kind of thing, it is super easy to pay attention to something that makes it easier to get out of our window of tolerance, rather than supports us coming back into our window of tolerance. When we are overwhelmed, when we're enraged, when we're shut down, when we're frozen, we're not thinking clearly. We're out of our window of tolerance. So the third foundation, the Pali word for the third foundation is Chittanupassana. It means observation of the states of mind. And these states of mind, the Buddha categorizes into pairs of opposites. The mind with lust and without lust, with aversion and without aversion, with delusion and without delusion, a cramped mind and a scattered mind, a developed mind and the undeveloped mind, the surpassable mind and the unsurpassable mind, concentrated mind and the unconcentrated mind. One of the things that is really important part of the third foundation of mindfulness, and if I could make this 3 feet high and in super bold letters, I would. Nowhere are we asked to judge our mind states. And so if we are filled with anger, if we're filled with lust, if our mind is surpassed or concentrated or distracted, there is no place that encourages us to have a judgment about the things that we're experiencing. And so I want to just take a moment and let that sink in. It's an invitation to be with what we're experiencing without having a judgment about it. Now, obviously, that itself is a huge training, to get past judging the things that we're experiencing. And there's a whole process of being able to do that. But the Buddha was explicit. He was not setting us up to judge our experience. This part of the sutta is explicitly clear. We can have whatever experiencing we're having, and we don't need to feel bad about it. So I want to tell you a little story. Yes, Tia.
I've had a question in the chat about what a surpassed mind means.
Okay, so unsurpassed and surpassed, this is a good question. And I actually unsurpassed, and surpassed. This has to do with stages of awakening, and I don't have more technical information to describe it other than it has to do with when the mind opens up to understand its own true nature, the kinds of things that one experiences is different than in an ordinary consciousness.
Are is the list in the sutta kind of in the order of the stages? Like it would go from I don't know what do we've got here? Concentrated, surpassed, concentrated, liberated. Like are those in order or are they not related like that?
No, I think it is in order, because lust and aversion and are the hindrances.
At the beginning.
Scattered and unscattered happens when we start to get more concentrated, concentrated and unconcentrated, liberated and unliberated. Yeah, so it's a progression. Yeah. So I can't remember what year it was, but I was on retreat and something happened and I was absolutely enraged. I was just enraged. And it was right before a 10-day retreat. So I was going on a solitary 10-day retreat and I was just filled with like livid. And by then I had been meditating about 20 years. And, you know, you can have a thought, I've been meditating 20 years, I shouldn't be angry. You know, I've been teaching for 5 years or 10 years, I shouldn't be angry. I'm a Buddhist nun, I'm a meditation teacher, I shouldn't be angry. But instead of focusing on any of those thoughts, I just stayed with the bare experience of anger. I got up angry. I brushed my teeth angry. I had breakfast angry. I walked on my walking path angry. I didn't do rain practice. I didn't shout. I didn't journal. I didn't emote. I didn't cathart. I just was with the anger. Morning, mid-morning, midday, late afternoon, at night, and I went to bed angry. And I did this for as many days as it took for that anger to cool itself out. All I did was pay attention to it without resisting it, without identifying with it. By paying attention to it without resisting and without identification, it liberated itself. Knowing this is hugely liberating. And not everybody is in the position where they can do that. And so we also have to recognize that when we're not in a position of doing that, we need to be careful that we don't set ourselves up thinking that I should be able to do this. Sometimes we actually need a different kind of support. Yeah. So the third foundation of mindfulness instructs us not to identify with any of the contents of our mind, but just to know them for what they are like. Not to fashion an I, a me, or a mine out of what we are experiencing. So to shift our experience from I'm experiencing anger to this is what is happening now. Anger is happening now. And that shift from I am angry to this is happening now is a radical departure from our ordinary experience where we identify with what we're experiencing. I'm bored. I'm angry. I'm scattered. I'm happy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm restless. This whole process of shifting from identification to knowing pauses our tendency to reject, to congratulate, to identify, to feel dejected for what it is that we are experiencing. Now, one of the reasons why this whole path is so powerful, Venerable Analayo, in his book, The Satipatthana, The Direct Path to Realization, he says it like this. He says, doing this lifts the veils of what we ordinarily ignore and suppress, because the mind state threatens our personal values, integrity, and sense of self-importance. Sometimes we feel it's not congruent with our identity or our position of who we take ourselves to be. Regular practice of pure awareness without interfering helps us recognize hidden emotions, motives, and tendencies of the mind. And Bhikkhu Bodhi goes on to say, as the contemplation deepens, the seemingly solid, stable mind reveals itself to be a stream of mental acts, flashing in and out of being, coming from nowhere, going nowhere, continuing in sequence without pause. So as we are with these experiences, and what the Foundations of Mindfulness encourages is a natural progression of insight that goes from the hindrances of greed and hatred and delusion, from being distracted to being more collected and experiencing the boundless abodes of loving kindness, compassion, and joy, the preliminary stages of concentration. And then as our mind starts getting more collected, we start to realize that there's something that can be let go of, that can be surpassed, until we get to the place where the concentration cannot be surpassed. It can't get any deeper. And this takes us through different stages of concentration. And the classic way that the progress of insight is encouraged is that one takes the stages of concentration, which makes the mind ripe for liberation. And it isn't that the hindrances are no longer there. It's not that we no longer feel angry or that we no longer feel greed. It's that the liberation is that the mind opens up to its natural state. It isn't something that we do. It's the mind is seeing itself. It's something that naturally unfolds when the conditions are present. And when we have this realization, it changes the way we see ourselves and changes the way we view our experience. So, and the reality is that it is absolutely possible to have stages of awakening and still have unresolved trauma. And so one of the things that has been an important point for me is that the classic teachings don't talk about this. And so people can feel confused about what's happening, particularly when they've had genuine experiences of opening and awakening. How is it possible that they can still be out of their window of tolerance and navigating trauma? Awakening doesn't automatically resolve or cancel or neutralize trauma. And so in our contemporary world, with what we're dealing with now, it's helpful to have both meditative tools, as well as understanding the way trauma operates, so that we can watch out when that's what's happening for us, and we can make wise choices that help us deal with what we're experiencing. So from a trauma-informed perspective, we've got a few things to keep in mind. We need to understand that if the mind state is within our window of tolerance or not. So that needs to be like a priority that we start looking out for. Trauma activation tends to follow patterns. Many of us are familiar with fight, flight, and freeze. Less spoken of, but equally part of these trauma response is fawn and fornicate. This means that our desire to please and make others feel okay can be a trauma response. Likewise, sometimes our desire for sex and our sexual behavior can be a symptom of our system trying to regulate from a trauma response. So if anger or lust is coming out of a trauma response, we need to get back into our window of tolerance before we can just pay attention to it. And the reason why is that when we're in a trauma response, the first thing that goes offline is our ability to observe. So if the third foundation of mindfulness is all about observing what it is that we're experiencing, but what we're actually dealing with is a trauma response, we have to bring our capacity to observe back online before we can engage with the meditation practice. So I just want to emphasize that with any states of mind, and particularly for the mind states around anger, lust, and sexual desire and sexual behavior, judgment isn't helpful. However, recognizing mind states or behaviors as trauma responses means that we have more chance to find appropriate tools and responses to bringing them into balance. But the good news is that as we understand the differentiation between regular mind states and mind states that are out of our window of tolerance, we can learn to use the foundation of mindfulness as part of our toolkit to help us come back into our window of tolerance. And the way that works is that we shift our frame of reference until we're paying attention to something that is calming and supportive. So, for example, let's say we're filled with rage, and we have a good reason to think that it's part of a trauma activation. Instead of focusing on the rage, we shift to the unpleasant feeling. And if we notice that we still cannot focus on the unpleasantness, we shift again to the body. We notice the senses. We walk on the ground, we hum, we rock, we walk barefoot on different textured ground. And as we settle back into having the capacity to observe what is going on, as our heartbeat slows down, as our breath gets deeper, as we start feeling less anxious and can notice that we're tracking more of what's going on, then we can upshift back to the quality of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and shift to the third foundation where we're titrating the unpleasant mind state with something that is positive, just like that dust cloth, back and forth, gently. You don't need to make it go away. You don't need to do anything. Just need to make sure that you're paying attention in a way that is equal to your capacity. So when we're coming to the second and third foundation of mindfulness with a trauma-informed approach, it encourages us to move with gentleness, with awareness, and compassion. We need to track when we're in our window of tolerance and when we're out of our window of tolerance. When we're out of our window of tolerance, we need to make a deliberate effort. It needs to become our number one priority to get back into our window of tolerance. And depending on where we are, both in terms of being inside or outside, depending on where we are in our trauma recovery, will determine the importance of having the agency to choose the level of intensity of sensations to focus on, how much we titrate, move back and forth between pleasant and unpleasant, or change our focus to ensure that we stay within our window of tolerance. So that's my talk for tonight. And I'm happy to pause here and hear your impact, to hear your comments, to hear your experience, to hear your questions. And I invite you to either raise your hand and speak aloud, or you're welcome to put them in a chat.
I'm gonna open up the chat here so that participants can chat with everyone instead of just me. So if you want to put your question in the chat, I'll probably still read it if that comes up, but Maddie has her hand up.
Yes, Maddie, please go ahead.
That was a lot of information, and overwhelm is being felt. I'll practice right now. Overwhelm is being how did you say it? Overwhelm is happening. But if I could I'll skip over the many things that I didn't understand and just go to this last sentence. My main question when you're titrating, so when I get out of my window of tolerance as an emotional eater, I'm looking at it a different way. This thing you're saying about titrating, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, there's a part of me that's conditioned to titrate with food. Now, I know I'm applying it probably incorrectly, but the truth is the sensation of something crunchy or sour or sweet, it's going to keep very strongly and very effectively, because it's my go-to, will interrupt the overwhelm that I'm feeling back and forth. Come on, do a little bit more work. Eat, work, eat, work. Now, I have a sense I'm not interpreting this correctly, because it's almost like, oh, this thing I've habitually and conditionally been using, and probably the point is I'm sort of choiceless. I forget all my tools, and the only tool I'm going to go to is the most effective tool. And so I'm a very choiceless state. And the choiceless is almost a compulsion to titrate these irritating feelings by giving myself very vivid and pleasant sensations until my belly is like, stop. So my mouth is having vivid sensations, but go right to my brain. But my belly is getting less and less pleasant, interestingly enough. And there's a crossing point, at which point the mouth or the taste buds stop working because the whole body doesn't have hunger anymore. So I have a sense, as I said, that I'm confused now. And this new thing, I'm like, oh, is compulsive eating a habitual and way that I've been choicelessly titrating the overwhelm? Can you speak to that and get me a little bit less foggy than I feel right now about it?
So first of all, I just want to lift up the amount of clarity that you have, because you described that very, very well, very beautifully, and you talked about it with quite a lot of nuance and detail. So before we go into fog, let's just take a moment and pause and celebrate how clear you are. So when you feel like you don't have other choices, then it's common to use the choice that has worked for you. On some level, it's been an effective strategy and it's worked. So the way to start opening up new choices is to substitute other things that are positive, that don't end up with a negative impact. So let me give the dancing example. Okay, I love dancing. And I'm in a place where the dancing is readily available, it's affordable, and I can go often. There's no downside. It's not karmically complicated. There's no big thing that happens. There's no, I don't drain any account. There's nothing bad that happens, but it is intensely pleasurable. The same is true with walking in nature. So if I go for a walk, I can be dysregulated or upset or distressed or freaked out or whatever I'm in. And if I can walk for more than 3 miles, it's almost guaranteed that by the end of the 3 miles, I feel totally different. Okay. So it takes time. There's a limiting factor about it. It takes time. Sometimes I don't have the energy to walk more than 3 miles. Sometimes I can hardly walk. So there's some conditions around that sometimes are harder to fulfill. But also, it's like dogs, I love animals. So I make a point of going to dog parks and I just talk to the dogs. I don't bother with the people. I talk with the dogs And I totally snuggle and love on the dogs, and the dogs are happy and the people are happy, and I get regulated. And in that context, there's no drawback. Nobody gets upset. There's no problem. It's available, it's easy, and it totally works. So what you have is a system that has worked for you, but it has some drawbacks. So rather than feel bad, what you need to do is celebrate that it's worked for you, and now start looking for something that doesn't have the drawbacks.
Just so I can get clear, and we both get clear, dancing, I dance about 6 days a week. I bike every day, and I hike about 4 days a week. These things we have in common. It's incredibly state changing for me. The trouble is that we're talking about a point of overwhelm where I'm already choiceless. And there's a habit that food is an unchoice. It's almost like what happens because it's a habit. The other things I'd have to choose. I shall drive to a dog park now. Like I would have to make that choice. Whereas for some reason, food is the choiceless thing that happens when I don't have even the presence to make another choice. It almost sucks me into the vortex from a choiceless state. And so I'm wondering about the transition. And it seems like it has to happen almost before I get overwhelmed. And you talked about that, like just a few, like not even a second, but a half a second, as if I can notice overwhelm is happening, I still am in a choiceful state. And I could pick dance and hiking and biking and the many things I love to do. But a half a second later, the window is super tiny. A half a
That's
second
exactly
later,
right.
all the choices go away and food happens. And that's how it goes for me.
And so what's needed is to start becoming very curious about that half a second and start expanding it. And so like for years, I walked around with rocks in my pockets because rocks were my super regulators and I couldn't always get to the big rocks. So I kept them in my pocket so that if I couldn't get to the big rocks, I would reach into my pocket and hold the little rock. And then the contact with the little rock would remind me of the big rock. And that half a second would start to expand. Okay, so you need to find touch points or things that remind you of the bicycling, the dancing, the whatever, all the things that you do, and start seeing if there are more things that you can bring that are closer to home that you can effectively put in your pocket. Something that reminds you of dancing or something that reminds you of bicycling, something that reminds you of being out in nature, so that you can bring it and put it in your pocket so that you can expand that half a second to a second and then to 2 seconds. Because that's exactly the edge. That's exactly it. And you've expressed it extremely clearly. After that point, there are no choices. There's just habit. So we have to expand that window so that we increase our capacity to stay in choice and give ourselves more options that are accessible to us. And develop some tools. So it might be, I don't know of the few tools that we've done, the humming, the rocking, the vertical lines, the green things, the heart on the, there might be one of those that really is a good fit for you. So when you notice you're moving in that direction, you pause and you take 3 breaths and you do the thing. Whatever the thing is, whether it's rocking or humming or hand on the heart or deep breaths out or vertical lines, and start to get familiar about what are the things that are soothing and calming for you. And do them because your body will remember. You'll have a body memory more than you'll be able to remember. It's like the whole thing starts getting foggy, but it's like there's something in me that says trees. I don't know what says trees, but it just says trees. And so then I know this now. I just go to trees. And I've scoped them out. So I've got 15-minute drive trees and 5-minute drive trees. And I've got trees, so that if I'm in a bad shape and I don't have 15 minutes, I've got a 5-minute tree. Because that's exactly what it's like. We have these narrow windows, and inside them we've got choice, and outside of them we do not have choice. And that is the truth. Totally is the truth. Tia.
We had a chat that looks like it just came to me, so I'm going to read it out loud for us all. And Erica said, when you're stuck in the numb, angry, stagnant phase, is there a way to navigate through it, or do we really just wait it out? It's beginning to feel like depression at this point.
Okay, so anger, so this is part of the difference between Buddhist meditation practice and trauma practice. In Buddhist meditation practice, they're all about just watching something rising, okay, and observing. A trauma practitioner would never have you do that, never. They would have you engage with the energy and let it express itself. So in a trauma activation, it's really important to let the energy move through you and do what it needs to do. And so when I was in Hawaii, I had personal instructions to take a machete and to massacre coconuts. Now, Hawaii, there's an endless supply of coconuts, okay? I had a machete for 2 years. 2 years, I massacred coconuts. It was the best. And then I'd take these coconuts and I'd make totally yummy, delicious things that I would eat and would nourish me, you know? So what's important to know, there's a couple things. One is that if there's any chance that you cannot do this without harming yourself or harming somebody else, it's not okay to do it. You need to absolutely know this is not about acting on harming yourself or harming somebody else. Okay. If there's any doubt, then it's off limits. You can't do that. But if you're clear, it's not about harming you or harming somebody else, then it's okay to let that energy move and to express it. It's really helpful. I want to tell you another example that will help with this story, because it's not anger, it was fear. I was in a, I've had health stuff for 100 years. And one of the iterations of health stuff was I was chemically sensitive to everything. And I was traveling and chemically sensitive, and I was staying with a person who was generous enough to clean the whole house 4 days before I got there and take all of the chemical things and put them in the garage so that they would be out of the house. Very kind, very generous. I came in, I went to the room, I got in the bed, and I flipped out because the sheets were washed in fabric softener. So I felt like I was walking through open machine gun fire. I mean, I was completely flipped out. And I was saying to myself, it's fabric softener. It's fabric softener. And I was doing all the things. I was doing the soothing points and the calming points, and I was doing the mantras, and I was doing the chanting. Zero. I didn't sleep. I mean, I had the sense to pull the sheets off and to put them in a plastic bag and to stick them down the hall, but I didn't sleep. I got up, I got on a bicycle, and I pedaled downtown. When I engaged my big muscles to run away from the thing that was scaring me, in 5 minutes, my whole system calmed down. So part of what we need to learn how to do is speak reptilian. We need to speak to the reptilian part of our brain. The reptilian part of the brain is not interested that it was just fabric softener. It does not care. The reptilian part of the brain is that it's scaring you, it's life-threatening, and you have to get out of here, and it's a matter of life and death. And if you are not going to run away, I am not going to calm down. There is nothing you're going to tell me that's going to get me to calm down. The only thing that worked was when I got on the bike and used my big muscles to escape the danger. Now, afterwards, I could make sense out of it and say, you have to learn how to speak reptilian. When you're in a flight experience like that, fear, you have to let your big muscles engage and engage with running to get away. And everything was like, so we need to learn how to speak reptilian. and learn when we're angry how to engage that energy and let it move through us in a way where we're not going to cause ourselves or anybody else harm. Trust it. Totally trust it. It is absolutely not about sitting and patiently watching it. It's the opposite. It's about having like rage ceremonies, grief and rage ceremonies. So, anything else? Comments, impact? I want to switch gears and I want to talk about the integrated meditation program. The integrated meditation program takes these set of teachings to another level where we're actually trying to repattern the things inside of us that are set in the way that they are to cause the reactions that we have. And part of the reason why meditation doesn't do that is because the Four Noble Truths and the path of insight is based on the 7 factors of awakening. And the factors that set these early patterns in place are not the 7 factors of awakening. They're 5 different factors. When you bring those factors together in an environment that is charged and potentized, and people are supporting each other to develop those qualities, things shift quite noticeably. And so the integrated meditation program brings the 5 factors that those early developmental patterns, the absence of which created them, in order to shift. And as we have more internal sense of resilience and sense of basic trust, it helps us to be able to navigate that window so it opens and we have more capacity to deal with the traumas that we're dealing with so that we're not in a constant state of activation. So Wednesday night, tomorrow at 5:30, I have a drop-in experience for free to talk more about what it is, to do some of the practices and to ask your questions about what the program. It's a 6-month program that is multi-layered in terms of big group, small group, one-on-one, peer group activity, to get people familiar with these practices so that they can saturate in and see significant shifts. And I believe Tia put the link in for the drop-in experience. If you haven't registered, register and you'll get the link for it. So, how are you feeling? I can't hear you, you're muted. Erica, unmute yourself so that I can hear you.
I was just much better. Like I felt very stuck for the last little bit, and I felt like I couldn't get past, like, what you were describing there for a minute. Like I was just, and I have been kind of just sitting with a lot of it, and haven't really been moving it. But I'm super deep into my healing journey at this point. I'm, past EMDR. I'm doing mindfulness based therapies now, so that kind of tracks with like what I need to be doing. I do Wim Hof breathing. That's another thing that I do frequently, hybrid breathing, to kind of get some of the anxiety and the stuff out. So I feel like that was just validating to hear you say that, and to kind of, like know that I have this stuff in my toolbox. I'm just kind of, it's time to kind of move through it. And that was very, very helpful at this point.
Yeah, did you want to say something about the Dharma?
I am happy to. One of the so the concept of dana is generosity, and I want to highlight that the first offering of generosity from all y'all is your time, and I really appreciate you spending this time with us. So please know that we start there. And going on from there, if there's more that you're able to share with us, we split any financial generosity from that's identified with either with Amma in the giving notes, or now or later on, we split it with Amma, and we use our part paying it forward to keep developing programming, so that we can keep sharing with you and you can keep sharing with us. So really trying to keep the whole thing going. But I really want to remind everybody that it starts with, you're paying attention, and we really appreciate that. And if there can be more, then we really appreciate that. And then if you want to come participate with us, we like come in and do volunteer stuff, or, I don't know, you want to be on the board, or on a committee, maybe. We would really appreciate that. So please, if you're new to the Dharma Collective, get on our newsletter, check out what we're doing, and the stuff going on with Awakening Truth is just off the hook. So please click through, check out one of the Wednesdays. And if the integrated meditation program is the right thing for you, then I don't know. What's my favorite thing that anybody said about it is it's all rainbows and unicorns, which, who says that after 6 months? So yay. Yeah, that's what I got. We've got one more on Saturday. Hopefully y'all be available to come join us on Saturday. And then at the collective on Sunday, once a month, which is this Sunday, we have Alejandra Soroka coming and doing a 2-hour workshop. They're monthly workshops. They're all about communication, and she sets an amazing container. So if you want to experience like what it's like to have really conscious agreements and bring those kinds of things into your regular communications in your relationships, at your work, with yourself, probably for those of us taking a class like this. Alejandra does a really amazing job. And I know there's a whole bunch of other programming, but this one I've been talking about and I'm super excited about still. And then I'm absolutely enchanted with Alejandra coming once a month. So feel free to join us with that, or click through on the calendar and see who's coming, because there's stuff and people.
Lovely. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you on Saturday.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Amma.
Thank you so much. It was beautiful.
And hope to see you tomorrow for the drop-in experience. You can ask more questions about the integrated meditation program.